of the TRC, thematic hearings on economic crimes. This afternoon, to begin with, shall we all stand to administer the oath?
Before you proceed, I was thinking that this class, you were trying to say something.
No, I wasn't sure we were on the air.
When we on the air? No. This is closed just for TRC purposes.
To the TRC of Liberia is the truth. Nothing but the whole truth. So,
Please be seated.
On behalf of the Commission, we want to welcome and extend to you our appreciation and gratitude for you honoring our invitation to come and help us with the tax the Liberian people have assigned us. The TRC was established to give some meaning to the conflict we had. A lot of us are still confused about why we had a conflict in the first place, what happened, and as a nation and people, what do we need to do in order for us to move forward away from the path of violence and the kind of conflict we experienced. And because of that, the TRC was established to do just that. And part of our approach is to review the very past we're talking about. And instead of just relying on resource documents and all of that, a lot of us Liberians who were active during that period, either in private service or public service, are still around. And we attach more value to the testimony and information of people who are alive. And that is why we are inviting Liberians from all spheres of life, in the military, in the political, in the financial and economic sector as well. We've invited you because we are doing an investigation on economic activities of the government during the period, private companies during the period, private citizens during the period, as well as public institutions. And a number of information have come to us which relates to the activities of the Ministry of Finance at the time. And some of them more specifically to your office as Deputy Minister for Revenue. So we thought that it would be unfair for us to just draw conclusions if we do not hear from you who were the minister at the time. So basically it's against that background that we have invited you. And like I said, we are very happy that we have honored the citation and you are here today. So please welcome again.
thank you.
Okay. I want to take this time to introduce commissioners, and following that I will do, before you make your presentation, I will do the line of some of what we have collected to date, just for your information, and then so that in your statement you can say one or two about it if you care to. These are private hearings of the Commission. If you prefer that it be broadcast live, we can do that. But it's the choice of the Commission that we do this just for the purpose of the Commission and not for public consumption. Commissioner Omosida sits at the end on my left. Commissioner Gerald Coleman, he is oversighting these activities on economic crimes of the Commission. Commissioner Burr Brown-Boo and Commissioner John Stewart will be coming. He left a while ago. And I'm Jerome Verdia. You say, welcome again. I'd just like to go over some of what we have, like I've said before. One issue has to do with a company called Natura. Natura is a logging company represented by Costco and Hoban. We understand he obtained a certified statement of account from the Ministry of Finance and FDA to the tune of $2 million tax credit from the government of Liberia around July 17, 2000. Then there is an issue of the Rights Stabilization Fund. Just in case if you have any idea of it, we heard since the 80s this fund was established, and it continued even during the period of President Taylor. And it was meant to stabilize the rice market, but to date, there's no information on how the funding was used or where it's being deposited. Any information if you have that you can share with us. We understand that Tradeco Bank was a depository bank, and the Ministry of State for Presidential Affairs controlled that account, but it is not reliable information as yet. Then duties on petroleum products. From information we gathered from others at the Ministry of Finance, specifically Customs, is that all duties on petroleum products didn't go through Customs. We're wondering how duties on petroleum products are being handled, just in case if you have some information as well. And then we received information also that whilst you were a deputy minister, you single-handedly authorized the transfer of approximately $8 million in forestry revenues between July 1999 and July 2000. And that they were transferred to individual and not government accounts. We're hoping you will help us with that also. Then that up to now, the Ministry of Finance has no documentation on taxes paid by OTC to the government of Liberia for the entire period of its operation. And that OTC up to now is not a registered company in Liberia, and its withholding taxes and other corporate taxes are not well documented at the Ministry of Finance. Then another issue has to do with Lone Star. It is also our information up to 2003, Lone Star was not a registered corporation in Liberia, but that it claims to have a Liberian partnership owning 40% of its shares. The company is supposed to be PLC, but to date, we have not obtained any information in terms of registration of PLC. But it is our information that PLC is shared between President Taylor, former President Taylor, Imaiwa Shaw, and Benuna Ure, and that there is no evidence that this company has paid income taxes of any kind to the government. And we are hoping that as Minister for Revenue during that period, you also aid us whatever information you have. The panel of experts reported that you at one point in time, I think for a period of about 6 years, requested both Ure and Shaw to produce their tax returns, and they didn't comply. And according to records we've collected, the last time dividend was declared in favor of PLC was in 2006 in an amount of about $3 million. So basically that's the substance of what we have, and we'll also be happy if you have any additional information that could assist us in understanding how revenues and finances operated during that period from 1997, 96 up to 2003. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Can we go through this item by item? Right. Now, the question of signing tax credits, the way the Revenue Department worked under my tenure, if you are a taxpayer and you got a tax bill, you proceeded to the central bank or whichever tax-paying commercial bank was collecting government revenue at the time. The payment was made directly to the bank, and the bank issued the official flag receipt. That's for government. So my office then would only deal with the flag receipt. However, there were cases where monies were not paid to the bank, but were authorized, paid someplace else by the President of Liberia at the time directly. In the case of NATA, for example, the information we had from NATA is that there was some money being paid to the University of Liberia for transfer of facilities to the Fendale campus. Now, when that money gets paid, representatives from NATA came into the office and asked for flag receipts for their own internal auditing purposes. Well, naturally, I wouldn't give or authorize a flag receipt to be issued if I don't see any evidence of some authority higher than myself authorizing that payment to go where it had to go. Now, in that case, the President would confirm, and he did confirm. I believe, and I'm not really sure, that NATA was a forestry company or a forest area that was owned by the University of Liberia. And then also that this was an agreement was entered between the university and Goscovenhoven, and that can be verified by people at the university or a representative from NATA who was here at the time and who made the representations to my office. So based on confirmation from the President at the time, we issued the tax receipt acknowledging. And one of the reasons I needed to do that was because I needed to take in this revenue as part of our work in the Revenue Department. We can't, if we have an estimate for the month, for example, of $6 million intake, and $2 million got diverted someplace else, not due to any action on our part, but that money naturally would have come to the Liberian government, and it would be seen as revenue intake from my office. So I had to know where the money went, who authorized it, and then I would be in a position, in a position to issue a flag receipt. And so when we issued the NATA tax advance flag receipt of $2 million, it's not because we received money in the office or it was credited by the central bank, but it was because the owner of the company acknowledged that this payment had been authorized to someone, and he came in for the flag receipt to adjust his record, and that's how that was done. And the same thing, if you go further down on your list, referred to that $8 million you were talking to. The accounts, as I remember, were not in anybody's personal name, but we were informed, and actually, because I didn't know the nature of these questions, I didn't bring documents, but there was a document where former President Taylor actually listed where these amounts were going. In one case, it was payment for a Coast Guard vessel. In another case, it was payment for uniforms for the police. In another case, it was payment for, what was it for? A helicopter, I remember. So they were all listed, the reason for the payment, where it was transferred, it was all listed and initial on his hand. Now, the people who made these payments have their own corporate shareholders to answer to. They also had their auditors to answer to. So a record from my office in the Ministry of Finance acknowledging that this payment had been made as authorized by the President would help them on their side. At least that's the impression that I got. And so I authorized in the case of OTC, for example, from Buchanan, the flag receipts there was signed by our tax collector there at the time. I don't remember his name, but he signed it and we authorized it. And in some cases, actually, we learned about the payments long after the payments were made. And I mean, since we're being truthful here, the payments may have been actually made in 2000 or 1999, but it didn't come to our attention till a couple years later. And then we had to authorize the receipt. And in order to regularize it with the date of actual payment, those payments were actually backdated to the date of the payment. Okay, so that would account for all of those accounts. We did not make any payments to any personal account. In the case of the police uniforms, there was actually a name, and I can provide you with a copy of that later on, of the company where this money was sent. Now, Natura was a local payment that was made, and maybe someone from the university can acknowledge it. But certainly, the representative of the company is still here, and his name is Mark Kishan, and he can follow up on that for you. He was representing Natura at the time, and he was the one who interacted with my office generally, yeah. The next one, the Rice Stabilization Fund was not collected by my office, and we did not acknowledge any of those receipts. Between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Commerce, these funds were collected. In a case where advance payment was made, as in customs duty with rice, which was 50 cents per 100-pound bag, or even customs duty, as you mentioned, on petroleum products, there were instances where letters were actually received from the Ministry of State for Presidential Affairs, acknowledging, for example, that K&K had made a payment to the Ministry of Presidential Affairs, and K&K wanted his flag receipt because my tax officers would go after him. Okay, and either the flag receipt or the letter. And officially, it will be the flag receipt that will acknowledge that so-and-so amount had been received by the Minister of State for Presidential Affairs. Generally, those letters were signed by the Minister of State at the time, Jonathan Taylor. And then we would issue a flag receipt to K&K for customs duty. But the Rice Stabilization Fund, which was controlled by Commerce and Agriculture, was not really under my purview. Right. Customs duty, yeah, that refers to the rice account. Petroleum products, in a lot of cases, the normal procedure would be to just make your payment according to the rules through the bank. We'll hold up the products until the flag receipt was taken to the customs officer. And that's where the Commissioner of Customs would come in. They were not, it's too specific to say they were not handled by customs. There were cases where they were indeed handled by customs where we made them pay. Personally, I ran a tight ship, and if we didn't get evidence that you paid somebody, some authorized person, either meaning it would come through the executive mansion, if we didn't get evidence that payment had been made, then we just closed up the operation until we got it. And under that kind of pressure, they would either bring a letter from the Ministry of State, and then we would issue the flag receipt acknowledging, yes, that money had been made. Now, we were responsible for funding the budget in a certain manner. We didn't handle any cash in my office. You went to the bank, you paid your money, and then you brought the flag receipt. And that flag receipt, our tax officers then would calculate what is received on the flag receipt and add it in and take it in as revenue. And that would build up my revenue from 1 million to 1.2 million or something like that. In the absence of any acknowledgement that payment had been made to the government of Liberia, that would mean then I have a revenue shortfall. And so the flag receipts were issued, and it got to the point where we were dealing with a situation called non-cash, meaning cash did not come through the revenue department into the central bank account. Non-cash meaning that one way or the other the money was paid, but not through the regular channel. So we had a special reporting system for that. And the flag receipts actually should not have been issued by anyone in the office unless it's authorized and you had a supporting document to say that someone has received the money or the money had been paid. So the non-cash issue got to be a second line where certain revenues were actual physical cash that could be verified for the bank, and other revenue, because we didn't handle it and the bank didn't handle it, so we issued a cash to acknowledge that yes, it had gone either to the executive mansion or that the president had authorized the sending of this money somewhere else. And it was always, they had justification for it. 2 million, for example, to the University of Liberia is justified if the president acknowledges it and signs it. Then then you give the taxpayer a receipt to acknowledge that he had paid his obligation. Silas, yeah, cool. Okay, we addressed the revenue and OTC, where they were authorized to pay for various items that were ordered by the government. And that would more or less handle that, the forestry related taxes, especially to OTC. OTC had paid so much money through direct authorization from the president that at one point we had to go to Buchanan and run after them to pay their vehicle license just so we could get some cash from them. And we got some motor vehicle license, driver's licenses, because they had a lot of foreign workers there, mostly Malaysian. And we also had to go after them for things like work permits and all this sort of thing. But they had a special relationship with the president's office, and so we couldn't really go after them in the normal tax way. You go after them, you find out that we have already paid so much, and we have already paid so much. So my office, to record all of those payments, we issued these flag receipts, and if you look in the revenue report, we took it in as revenue coming into the government of Liberia. Right. So that would be OTC. With the corporate taxes, I think it's still on the books that companies that are investing over a certain amount of X million dollars into the country get corporate tax exemption as the investment incentive. And OTC, not having operated for more than, I don't think they had reached the 5-year limit. And a lot of the other companies, they had corporate tax exemptions, so corporate tax filing did not apply. And those concession agreements should still be filed with the Ministry of Finance. Whether OTC was registered or not, I doubt if OTC would have operated in the country without some kind of corporate registration document. And I think they might still have copies of those. So if the documents would not be filed in the Ministry of Finance, but they would be filed in the Ministry of Commerce, because they registered the business, and of course the articles of incorporation are always filed with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We had a copy of the concession agreement that they had exemption from a lot of taxes. concession agreement signed by the President and the NIC at the time, the National Investment Commission, so they weren't interested. But withholding taxes on dividends, they were entitled to pay. Withholding taxes for their employees, there were some payments recorded. And let me see, Lone Star, same case. They had to have some kind of corporate registration and business registration with the Ministry of Commerce. Otherwise, the commerce official wouldn't have allowed them to operate. Lone Star corporate taxes, we have records of taxes that were left at the Ministry of Finance. If they disappeared, then I don't understand. But in any case, Lone Star itself should have their own records, because we always warn taxpayers that when you make your payment, make sure that you have the record of your tax payment, because record keeping in a situation, government situation, was very difficult. The tax administration was also not what we would like it to be. I understand now everything is computerized and that makes it easy. But for tax administration purposes, we were not really equipped to follow up on tax payments. Computerization would have made it easier. So we insist, and we used to put out revenue newsletters asking taxpayers to please keep your tax receipts, keep the record. And people generally did. So I think as far as corporate payments from Lone Star, they should have a record of that. They have a record. Unless they were giving particular exemption at the time. PLC investment, I'd never heard of it. 40% share in Lone Star. Ministry of Finance. Lone Star recognized, but PLC investment I'd never heard of. And if you will look at all the records when I was there, this company name never showed up. Okay. There were other companies who paid dividends, for example, but I don't remember dividends coming in by Lone Star. And it could be, and I would be guessing that they also have one of those investment incentive contracts that we give them corporate tax exemption for the normally first 5 years of operation. Tax returns issued to Shaw and Urey to produce tax returns. We probably did. We sent out tax returns notice to everyone, especially around the end of March when the tax filing date was due by April 15th. So we reminded all taxpayers, individuals as well as corporations, that the tax time was due. We put out general notices in the papers, which is still done, that tax payments were due. The panel of experts. I don't know what to say. I told the panel of experts that I haven't met the panel of experts. PLC. The last recorded payment was $3.2 million in 2006. Well, I wasn't there in 2006, so I really don't know about that. I left the Ministry of Finance in 2003, October. Excuse me. The period of Ministry of Finance? When was I there? 1997, September to November 2003. Bureau of Maritime Affairs, it's fairly straightforward. The Bureau of Maritime Affairs worked under the commissioner, but I was concerned with the revenue. And what usually happens, the money from maritime operations from ITC at the time, and later on this other company, they always credited the bank account. And then what they would do is send us bank advice to say, for example, on such and such a date, $50,000 was credited to the government from the maritime account. Please issue a flag receipt. then we would issue a flag receipt from our office. But later on, I thought that this is the most inefficient way to do it since the bank already had flag receipts. So we asked the bank to issue the flag receipts directly when the maritime funds came in and just send us a copy of the receipt. And that's how we took in the revenue. We recorded the revenue from those receipts and took it in and made it part of the revenue report for that month or that period. All right. So and then we tried to coordinate. What we tried to do was to balance the report out, and we tried to coordinate. For example, we get several flag receipts from the bank, and that's the money we will record as revenue. And then we wanted to make sure that the Bureau of Maritime Affairs also had the same figure. Generally, the figures differ, but from my office, we could only report what the bank gave us on the bank advice slip. All right. So we would attempt to see the Commissioner of the Bureau of Revenue to make sure that we were singing out of the same hymn book, so to speak, that we were recording the same figures. Generally, the figures differ, and then we try to go after what the difference was and where did it go and should it be part of our revenue. And, you know, if we were told it wasn't part of the revenue, we just didn't record it. Because I can't record something that I didn't see evidence of, so I didn't record it. Wire transfers made by government of Liberia. I'm sorry I can't help you on that because payments made for the government was under the Deputy Minister for Expenditure. Yeah, so when we got the money in and sent in our report, we informed through revenue reports, monthly revenue reports, all of the government agencies, which would be the Budget Bureau, where we got copies to them, copies to the Executive Mansion, of course, copies to the Minister of Finance and the Minister for Expenditure. And then they would try to balance, when we had to balance the account, whatever they spent against whatever was received. But the wire transfer out of the country, I was a signature to the account only in so much as one of the signing signatures isn't there, but usually the signature was the Minister of Expenditure and the Comptroller's Office. Now, in the absence of one of those, then I would be requested to sign a check. But other than that, and then I would sign once they have gone through the usual PGA process, Deputy Comptroller and all of that, and then by the time they brought it to me, then I signed it in the absence of one of the authorized signatures. So, sir, I'm looking at a document here. Natura and the Ministry of Finance, yes. What was the signature? You will see on these credits that there are 3 signatures on these credits, so it wouldn't be just my signature as the Deputy Minister for Revenue. It's very faint, so I don't know who that first signature is. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah, the FDA also signed, yeah. That's the FDA signature. I don't know about corresponding to Charles Taylor personal bank account. I do know that what I was told was that this money had been paid, and the impression I got was that Natura being the forestry reserve for the University of Liberia, and I know that they had been trying to get some people to work that forest so that they could get some revenue. And I assumed that it was true, and that this money was going to go towards the Fendel campus move. If you remember, once all of the ministers had to go to Fendel campus just to clean it up, and it was around that time.
Anything else you came to say beyond the document? you have?
No, not really. We ran a fairly straightforward and fairly tight ship as far as dealing with the taxpayers and keeping records. The computer, I understand, that we used in the office was dismantled, but there was a lot of records there. And the gentleman who worked with me is now traveled to the States. So, and I don't like to take records home with me except for this one document where President Taylor has actually initialed his request for these receipts. And that's about the only one that I have. And sample letters of where we would write to the Deputy Minister for Expenditure, because we had a policy that nobody could get a check from the Ministry of Finance unless they got tax clearance from my office, because people were always bypassing. So whenever one of these things came up, like we were issuing credit to a logging company or any company for tax payment made, we would send a memo to the Deputy Minister for Expenditure so that he would know that this payment had been made. That's about it.
Thank you very much for responding to our inquiry. Commissioners will ask one or two questions, some of them for clarification or out of emphasis. But I want to start by asking, in what form did the President's authorization for these credits normally take? Telephone call, written documentation?
Well, there were telephone calls because, you know, they would, whenever the taxpayers, the tax officers go out and start to shut down operations, and they would do it on my authority, I would either get a phone call, and it was only the President's authority that I would recognize, unless the Minister of Finance had been instructed by the President to ask me to do it. But they would come, I mean, the whole group would come running in the office and say, we already paid this money, and now the people close the office down, and that kind of thing. I said, well, I don't know. And then I remember one incident where they said, yeah, the number call the President. I said, I don't call President. If he wants me to do something, let him, he can either call me or he would send a letter. And so I have this whole list of about a total of about $12 million credit to OTC, where the payment had been authorized. And the detail of the payment is also listed, including what I have told you for specific purchases, such as a helicopter or uniforms or patrol boats kind of thing. But there were also situations where they said the money has been transferred, Government of Liberia account, Citibank, New York, or somewhere else. And in that case, you don't really know that the Citibank account may be in somebody's name rather than Government of Liberia. What you're going on is what's on the paper before you. If subsequently it has been discovered that this account was in somebody else's name other than what I thought I knew, then of course that was beyond my control.
So you had no way of verifying, or you had no authority to go beyond the President's word or instruction?
Well, what I'm saying to you is, in the case of these particular payments, by the time they got to me, they had already been made like 2 or 3 years earlier. And the reason they got to me was because there were auditors, after the company auditors, I guess, and shareholders, after the managers of these companies, because they had to report to somebody, and they wanted acknowledgement made that would that some authority in Liberia authorized them to do this against taxes. Okay, so the payments were made, and they had the flag receipts. In the case of OTC, their expediters who were after it wanted these for the for their tax auditors, and the payment had already been made much earlier, so there wasn't anything I could have done anyway to prevent it, and I don't know if I would have been able to.
But did your auditors go one step forward to verify whether these purchases were actually made? For example, uniform for police, helicopter, and
well, there was a helicopter that came in, and there was a patrol boat, and there was a time when the police they had some brand new uniforms, shining buttons, and so you would expect, and if the man who supplied these uniforms come in with an invoice and say, the payment has already been made, but I need to have it confirmed for my auditors, and that's it.
One last question from me has to do with the Ministry of State. Did letters from the Ministry of State, as far as the Ministry of Finance is concerned, substitute for flag receipts?
No, that's why they were sent to us, to authorize the issuing
of
the flag receipts, yes.
So as the Minister of State may write a letter, please to confirm that
I have received
$5 million.
$50,000, well, not that much,
okay,
but $5,000, please issue a receipt to the vendor. And this happened in the case of the rice money against customs duty on rice.
Yeah.
Okay, and I expect that if anything was done on the rice stabilization fee, then that letter would go to the Ministry of Commerce. I don't know of the Ministry of Commerce issuing flag receipts. As far as I know, only the Ministry of Finance, Revenue Department, or the banks issued the flag receipts, because we were careful about handling those. As you have heard, there were often fake flag receipts on the market all the time.
So beyond the letter from the Ministry of State, did the Ministry make any report to the Ministry of Finance, maybe at the end of a quarter, at the end of the year?
The Ministry of State?
The Ministry of State.
No. We made the reports, actually. It went the other way. And we would say how much money we had recorded as revenue, and we would say whether this money came in the form of cash received in the bank or cash that was just transferred directly. And we tried to keep the two separate.
Because of the nature of government operations at the time, how would you describe the whole process and procedure of issuing tax credit? Was it the order of the day, or it was an exception?
I think it was an exception. I think it was exceptional. It wasn't really the order of the day. And you will remember that during a lot of times during our tenure, it was conflict period. Things were not as normal as we would have liked. Okay, and even if we did collect all of this money and put it in the bank, it could still go the same way. The president could authorize, or authorizing signature could authorize money to pay directly out of the bank. And I don't know whether that happened or not, because I wasn't on the expenditure side, but it could very well be.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Commissioner Pearl Brownpool. Join the chairman to welcome you to come to explain citing facts that we had in our possession. And I think in keeping with procedure, we provided you here with the allegations that they had, to enable you to explain better. And I'm citing that, like you said, you have citing document that explains something. If you had known, you would have brought it. It's a positive, could you please let us have copy of that document?
Okay.
Yes. And the information issue to be discussed with you, very confidential. But at least we felt to refresh your memory, because someone as young as you are, we really figure that enable you to do a clearer picture. I even think that sheet of paper that we gave you should be returned. Because I was my copy. So, but just, if you don't mind, after all the questioning, that you could leave it so in case anything get outside, we will say that you took it out. I want to say thank you for the question I had. Like, you've already proven that within the period in question, there was civil conflict. So there was some deviation from the proper financial transaction, the manner in which natural financial transaction with someone like you in your field would have done. The only thing I talk about this Stratefco Bank. You were there from 1979 97 to 2003. Are you aware of any occasion, prior, because you went there for whether there were records that would be able to verify that this is maritime money? Because you talk about the maritime money for giving, and they only told you how much they spent that went for government, you all were to get receipt. It gives me the impression and a belief, knowledge that I know, that the maritime money were used also for other purposes. For example, during the war, because you went 97 when they were legitimate government, but during the war, my information clear, I know that this maritime money at one period of time were almost our only source, big source of revenue. Is that am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. You know that the maritime money will come in, that was really source of revenue. And that money, in fact, even during the interim government period, and Port time, God know Port you call it interim government period still, that money, they used to take that money, I know some, they used to take it to Stratefco Bank, and you will see the leaders of the different warring factions going there to pick up money from that maritime fund. Like, the Francois Massacre and Subu who had their group, and Francois Massacre, and the other people, they used to go to Stratefco Bank to get some of that money. Are you aware of it?
Not during the period that you're talking about, but the way the revenue situation works, okay? There's the Bureau of Maritime operating, let's say at the time in ITC. Yeah. ITC is responsible for it, and now LISCA. They receive proceeds from the ship registry, the corporate registry, and all of that on behalf of the government of Liberia. And the standing instructions is to transfer that money to the government of Liberia account at ITC. Yeah. Okay. Once ITC receives money from maritime sources, there is a bank advice that they would send to the Ministry of Finance for record purposes to say we have received $1 million. The best month when I was there, the best months were November, December, then July. Apparently that's the period when the ships will register and the corporate fees are paid. So they would just send a bank advice, and the bank advice would come to the expenditure department or directly to the minister's office to say maritime account at ITC now have $5 million in it. So it got to my office and we recorded the $5 million as receipts from maritime. And that's what we did. And then at the end of the month we would report, and at the end of the year we would report maritime proceeds. At the time it would average between $16 to $18 million a year, okay, when we were dealing with ITC. So once we record that revenue, our work is done. Now, who authorizes to go in there and take it out is another thing altogether. We didn't get involved in that. So it could be authorized by expenditure or some other authorized authority.
Yes, you talk, maybe not. You talk about RTC finished now by LISCA. Is this LISCA the same person who you talk about this Cohen? What do you call him, sir? Cohen?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
you very much for your testimony. Now, you talk about Natura. Say Natura is a property of the University of Liberia. Is that correct?
It may or may not be the information I was giving at the time. And I know that because I've been in the forestry business before, I know that the university did have a forest. And they were attempting at various points in time to commercialize it. And this Natura now, I understand, was the forestry that the university had, that they had entered into a contractual agreement with the Goscovenhoven, with the Gos Group. Okay? And so they were making a payment. It could have been taxes, it could have been dividends, it could have been royalty. But I understood at the time that there was advance payment being made to the university. And somebody will have to verify that. But I couldn't accept that. It was just based on the information I was given.
And you say, who was it representing Natura again?
Mark, M-A-R-K, Kishen, K-E-S-T-H-E-N. Or Gus Cohenhoven himself.
Yeah, no, God's name is here, but
Yeah.
this Christian name was.
But he worked with him.
Is he still around?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming. During the time of the stewardship as Deputy Minister for Revenue, was 1997 to 2003?
That's right. 1997 September to...
There were, during that period, Liberia had diplomatic relationships with Taiwan, and there were sums of money that was given to the government of Liberia by the Taiwanese government. I can't remember the figure offhand, but I do know that some money was given to the government of Liberia by Taiwan. Was such registered as revenue on the books?
Monies that we were aware of as being paid, and where the situation required a flag receipt, they came through us. Now, if any money came through the government of Taiwan and we were asked to give Taiwan a flag receipt for that, we would do that, but not necessarily so. There may be money received that we would not have been aware of. We have a portion in the budget under grants. All right, and if any money came, for example, from Taiwan as a grant, then we would record that revenue under grant. Okay, and if you pick up some of our revenue receipts, it's been 6 years. If you pick up some of our revenue receipts, you can see that those recordings were made. But if, for example, it came directly to the bank, and the bank received monies credited to government accounts, the bank would issue the flag receipts, and we had 4 copies of the flag receipt. One went to the person who gave the money, or the taxpayer, or the donor, or whatever. Another copy, 2 copies came to the Ministry of Finance, and 1 copy was retained by the bank.
Now I did hear you say that during the period, you were not involved with expenditure, so you will not be able to...
No.
I would like to ask, as a consequence of that response, I would like to ask whether national fiscal policy was compartmentalized in such a way that revenues coming in, you had no idea how revenue was dispensed, although you were responsible for receiving the revenue, but would it not have been something that would be the common knowledge of the ministers, deputy minister, to know revenue coming in and revenue being dispensed, for example?
At the end of the month, for example, we would all issue our reports, okay? And we would share reports. But while you are Deputy Minister for Revenue sitting in your office and you have just at the end of the day credited government account, maybe with $250,000 is in government accounts and is the work of the expenditure department based on the budget to allocate who gets that. I think they had, and they still do have, regular cash management meetings to manage the cash that was received. And we were not part of the cash management meeting. We were too busy chasing taxpayers.
Now, the National Port Authority is a major revenue generating arm of government. Can you say how much, for example, was generated, estimate, a rough figure, how much was generated during the period?
When we were there?
Yes.
Almost zero. Almost zero. We chased them for withholding taxes, which legitimately is the responsibility of every citizen who receives some kind of remuneration. We chased them for withholding taxes, but the argument at the time was always that government owed us so much money, and so when they withhold taxes from the individual employees, those taxes were simply not remitted, and it was a very difficult thing to collect any revenue from the port.
Now, does that include revenue generated by imports and exports?
Import and export, which basically comprise customs duties, was the responsibility of the customs people under the Ministry of Finance. That would have been my responsibility. If you brought in that microphone and we assessed a duty of $5 on it, you got the bill and you got the payment notice, and you went to the bank and paid it. So import and export wasn't under the Port Authority, but they did have their handling fees and port storage fees and those kind of fees, and they collected as part of port operations.
What would you know about the agreement between OTC and the government of Liberia?
It's a normal concession agreement which goes through the National Investment Commission process, which gives them certain investment incentives, and when all of that is done, the commissioners, which include the NIC chairman, commerce, agriculture, I think the minister, they would sign that concession agreement, and we would get a copy. Well, not always, sometimes we have to go after the copy just to see what investment incentives they were given.
So what was the role of the concession secretariat within the Ministry of Finance?
The concession secretariat attended those NIC meetings as a technician representing the Minister of Finance.
So it is our understanding that the OTC, the port of Buchanan, for example, was privatized to the OTC as there were some other ports. Now, in terms of what was brought in and exported, what would you say was the estimate figure of revenue that would have been generated where this concession agreement, within the framework of this concession agreement, considering that the concession secretary from the Ministry of Finance participated in these meetings and will have on record estimated revenue that was derived or to be derived from the port operations, say for Buchanan, for example.
Now you're confusing port operations and customs operations. Port operations would be under the port, the National Port Authority, and that would be the handling fees and that sort of thing. Now the customs duties would have been under the Ministry of Finance, under the Department of Revenue. Okay? So you want to know what would have been the estimate. Now the concession agreement would determine to a large extent what the income would be, because for example you get a concession agreement that says 90% exempt on all customs duties, 90% exempt, and that exemption would go for 5 years. If he's 90% exempt, then that means he's only paying 10% on what he's scheduled to pay.
So what did the agreement with OTC look like? What degree or what percentage exemption, for example, did OTC get?
I think it was one of those 90% exemptions. And you can get a copy of that agreement from the Secretariat.
At the Ministry of Finance?
At the Ministry of Finance, yes.
Now, it is also,
or the NIC.
It is also our understanding that OTC was making monthly shipments, and that the total, well, they made 3 shipments per month on an average of 31,000 thereabout cubic meters of logs, and 3 of such shipments amounts to something like 90,000 plus. So 90,000 plus cubic meters per month. So in terms of export revenue, how much was generated? What was the function of BVAC in this regard? What kind of reports they submitted to you as to assess duty? Because I assume at the time that BVAC was responsible for determining revenue applicable to the export of logs, for instance. So how much was that reflected in your records? How much revenue was generated for as export revenues on logging from the OTC?
Export revenue from OTC. BVAC, I don't remember BVAC being that involved in it, because BVAC was contracted for quality control, and they were collecting their own fees. All right, so whatever taxes you see were applied against OTC would have been what they would have generated. Now, we didn't have the time, and we never got around to assessing it, and that would, even if we did, the collector of customs in Buchanan would have had some kind of revenue figures down there. And since 6 years ago, I wouldn't keep those figures in my head. I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner.
Did he have? And would those records be at the Ministry of Finance?
Yes, they should.
Now,
and the custom people would have it, and also the port people would have it.
You just said BVAC was involved in quality control, but prior to BVAC, there was the Société Générale de Surveillance, SGS, that conducted pre-shipment imports into Liberia. I'm not sure to what extent they were doing pre-shipment exports from Liberia. But when BVAC came in, according to what I learned, BVAC was also involved in pre-shipment export arrangements. And such was that they will assess and determine the value of duty that will be payable and applicable to government. So what I'm saying is...
BVAC did not get involved in duties so much as customs did. And BVAC did not have a presence in Buchanan at the time, as far as I know. BVAC went in to calculate what the BVAC inspection fee would be. And
for pre-shipment?
For pre-shipment export. Export. And there were a lot of the companies who had concession agreements, take Pricing for example, who resisted any kind of inspection from BVAC. And the purpose of BVAC pre-shipment export, for example, was questionable, because in the case of logs, the buyer has already inspected his logs, and they question, why should you do my inspection when I already have a buyer if it's for quality control? Our customs officials down there calculated the duty. For, like you say, if 31,000 metric tons of shipment going out, that's a very large ship. I'm not sure about the figure, the size of the ships coming in, because the port will require a certain depth to get those large vessels, but they were large vessels. And the customs people will record, and there are their records now. If I record at BVAC that OTC is supposed to pay this amount, and OTC comes in and says, yes, I paid this amount, but I know I should pay this amount, but the amount has already been paid.
Didn't this present an anomalous situation to you as Deputy Minister for Revenue?
Didn't it present one? Anomalous?
An anomalous, yeah.
Well, those weren't normal times. Those were normal times, and a lot of times OTC was dealing directly. I think you heard of the word, the pepper bush. They dealt directly with the president. And so whenever we put the pressure on them, he would acknowledge that they had made this payment. Okay? So even if you estimated the amount of customs duty due, and the guy says he's already paid it, what can you do except acknowledge that, for example, $2 million has been credited to revenue because the money was paid to the government of Liberia?
But again, I will ask, was this not an anomaly that...
No, it wasn't an anomaly.
...will report revenues payable to government, and you as the repository of government revenues, or the collector of government revenues, would simply issue a receipt and says, well, this is what has been received, without authenticating whether this amount was actually received in the government coffers.
You weren't here earlier when we said that if I receive, and I mentioned that I have a list of payments that were made by OTC that were credited, tax credits, so OTC, up to $10 million were credited to them, or $8 million credited to them because they had already made it. And not necessarily just forestry revenue, the kind of thing that you're talking about, import-export revenue, which in the first place their concession agreement gave them a certain percentage waived, all right? Corporate tax waived. So whatever was due will have to be included in this $8 million that have been paid against certain instructions that came from the President of Liberia at the time. Okay.
Your office?
My office, through instructions from the President of Liberia, would issue the flag receipt, and we didn't just issue the flag receipt, we recorded the amount as revenue.
Can you give us an estimate figure on what was recorded during that period as revenue earned?
We recorded, well, to give you an estimate, there's an $8 million fee here. I have documents that say 12 million. All right, so you could take that 12 million as receipt for that period. And anything else that cash went into the bank, we will also have recorded them, but I cannot, I'm sorry, give you an exact figure of what was recorded in 2000 or 2003. No, I'm sorry.
Now, during the period also, there was a petroleum tax imposed for development purpose. How much was raised from that petroleum tax? Did you know?
That is also recorded in the revenue report. The petroleum tax at the time, I think, was 25 cents per gallon for the petroleum sales tax and 20 cents per gallon on petroleum import duty. Those taxes were paid through the banks, through the central bank, as part of government revenue and recorded. And so the records are also available on that. There were importing.
Were there any projections, for example, how much?
We projected from, at the time it was a company called West Oil. We projected about $300,000 a month, between $250,000 and $300,000 a month on sales tax and petroleum import duty.
That amounted to something like about 3.6 million a year.
Okay.
Say, so from 1997 to 2003, that figure would be something like almost 18 million plus. Was that reflected on the Ministry of Finance's books?
Sure. Whatever came in was reflected.
Now, the port of Greenville, what was the nature of the concession agreement with the Inland Logging Company?
Inland Logging Company had a special arrangement to operate the port of Greenville, and it came in, I think, around 2000, 2002, 2003, or maybe 2001, in the latter half of the administration. They had an agreement with the National Port Authority, and they ran it through there. So we were there to collect whatever customs duty was due.
So the concession secretariat again had no role in the formulation of that concession agreement with the Inland Logging Authority?
Maybe they did, and he can tell you directly. Maybe he did.
Is such an agreement available at the Ministry of Finance, for example?
It should be, sir. It should be.
It should be.
Yeah, but the agreement from port to port, the National Port Authority really should have that agreement, because it would not have been a concession agreement per se. It would have been, since NPA is responsible for operating all the ports, they had it within the purview to enter into contractual arrangements.
Yes, but what I know is that even though the NPA is management is responsible for imports, but revenues that derive from imports and exports are not under the...
They would be under the customs at the Ministry of Finance, the Revenue Department, and those would be recorded. No, we're not saying that they didn't collect anything. What I'm saying is whatever they collected is recorded and is there for the record.
Did your projections for revenue collection and subsequent to the takeover by Inland, was there any discrepancy, or was there any shortfall in revenue projections between the time prior to the takeover by Inland and subsequent to the takeover?
I don't think that port was functioning at the time. I don't think the port was functioning. Like
Greenville?
the port of Greenville, except maybe under MPA.
It was functioning.
We had a port collector down there, and whatever ships were coming in and revenue being recorded, he was collecting, making his deposits, and then reporting to the Ministry of Finance.
So the Ministry of Finance just had a perfunctory role? Or?
No, it did not. We had the authority to stop, and he did. We had a very good collector down there. He did. And he had the authority to stop any operations that were not up to date on the taxes. And generally, they would pay to the bank and show us evidence of payment by the flag receipt. It wasn't a perfunctory kind of arrangement at all.
What would you say about the case of Harper, the port of Harper, where
the ULC people?
Yes.
We had the same arrangement. We had our customs collector who collected revenue, deposited them, and made a report to central office. We had people assigned there.
Were there any discrepancies in the handling of those whatever revenue that came in? And were there any shortfalls in projections?
No, there were shortfall projections everywhere. Maritime, for example, we had shortfalls. Things didn't work out the way we had projected. Like I said, it was conflict time, and we started to experience revenue shortfall as the war became closer. There are always sometimes a revenue overrun.
Prior to 2001, for example, or prior to, say, between 97 and 2000, were there any such shortfalls?
97 and 2000? When we got there in 97, there was almost little or no revenue being collected in the government. Like Commissioner Wu said, most of the revenue that was coming in to operate the country came through maritime funds. So a maritime fund made up a large portion of whatever came in as revenue. When we started working in September, we tried to ensure that the collection of revenue was less and less and less a percentage of government's overall collection mechanism. And so we started to send our collectors out in various ports to ensure, and then we did succeed in getting a higher portion of our total revenue from taxes, from domestic revenue, as opposed to maritime, even though maritime remained constant at between $16 to $18 million per annum.